My 5-year-old looked at me and said, "You are not my mother." Then he told me the name of a coastal town we had never visited, and how he died there. I searched online to prove him wrong. Instead, I found an obituary that matched every detail he gave. But what scared me wasn't that he remembered dying. It was that he remembered how it felt. This is not a fictional story. This is something I tried to disprove, and couldn't. Kids get obsessed with dinosaurs, trains, fire trucks. They repeat strange sentences like curses they don't understand. They pick up words from cartoons, from daycare, from overheard conversations. They tell lies with the clean confidence of people who don't know the word consequences, yet. So when my son, Eli, started drawing the same thing over and over, I told myself it was just that, repetition. Habit. A new fixation. But the drawings weren't dinosaurs. They were all impact. A vehicle, long and thin like a pencil, tilting downward. Thick black marks for smoke. Jagged orange scribbles for flame. Little stick figures scattered near the bottom, some of them lying sideways. Every page had the same dark circle at the top corner, a sun that looked more like a bruise. On the third day, I knelt beside him on the living room rug and asked, as casually as I could, "What's that one?" He didn't look up. His hand kept moving. The crayon pressed so hard it left grooves in the paper. "That's when it happened," he said. "When what happened?" He paused then, just long enough for me to feel the first cold pinprick of unease, and added, almost bored, "When it burned. When I couldn't get out." I waited for the punchline. For a grin, a laugh, a kid's delight at spooking a parent. Nothing. His face stayed blank. Focused. Like he was describing the weather. I watched him add something new, a small blue rectangle with 2 circles beneath it. "A car?" I guessed. Eli nodded. "That's not our car," I said, still trying to steer it back into normal territory. "Ours is gray." He didn't blink. "My old car was blue." I remember the exact way he said old, as if it were a fact I'd forgotten, like the name of an ant. I stood up too quickly. My knee knocked the edge of the coffee table. The mug on it rattled, a dull ceramic clack that sounded too loud in that moment. "Your old car," I repeated. Eli finally looked up at me, and his eyes did something that made my stomach tighten. Not a child's pleading. Not confusion. Not mischief. Annoyance. The expression a man gives when someone corrects him in a meeting. "Yes," he said. "My old car. The blue one. The one with the tear on the seat." I heard my own voice get thin. "Eli, you're 5. He stared at me, patient in the most unsettling way. "I'm not Eli." I forced a laugh that didn't land. "Okay. Then who are you today?" He went back to his drawing and said, like he was stating his own address, "I'm Daniel." That was the first time he gave the name. Not a superhero. Not a cartoon character. Not a kid in his class. Daniel. I told myself to file it under imagination. A pretend identity. But the way he said it, flat, definite, made it hard to treat it lightly. That night, he refused to answer when my wife called him Eli at bedtime. "Eli, brush your teeth." He stood in the hallway with his small fists clenched at his sides, wearing dinosaur pajamas and the stubborn expression of someone twice his age. "That's not my name," he said. "Honey," my wife sighed, already tired in the way parents get tired before the day has even ended. "It is your name." He snapped his head toward her. "You're not my mother." The sentence hit like a slap. It wasn't the words alone, it was the certainty behind them. The accusation, sharp and wrong. My wife froze. I saw her face shift from irritation to hurt in one breath. "Eli," she started, voice breaking the tiniest bit. "Why would you say that?" His eyes flicked to me, then away, as if he didn't want to look at her while he said it. "My mother had red hair," he muttered. "My wife's hair is dark brown. So is mine. Eli's is a sandy light brown that came from some genetic lottery in our families." I stepped in, forcing calm. People can have different hair colors in families. He shook his head hard. No. My mother had red hair. She smelled like smoke. My wife's hand went to her mouth. I watched her swallow whatever she wanted to say. I crouched so I could meet Eli's eyes. Why would your mother smell like smoke? He hesitated. A tiny pause, like a file being opened in his mind. Because the house. He began, then stopped. His gaze slid to the side. His face tightened, like pain. Because what? I asked gently. He didn't answer. He pushed past me and marched into the bathroom, shutting the door too hard for a kid his size. The first night terror came at 2:13 a.m. I know because I checked the time on my phone with shaking fingers while I ran down the hallway. It wasn't a normal nightmare. It wasn't crying or calling out. It was screaming. A raw, full-bodied scream that sounded like it came from somewhere older than his throat. Like it was being dragged out of him. When I burst into his room, he was sitting upright in bed, eyes open wide but not focused. His hands clawed at the air in front of him. It's hot! He yelled. It's hot! It's hot! Open it! Open it! My wife flipped on the lamp. Warm yellow light flooded the room, revealing the familiar, the space-themed blanket, the night light shaped like a moon, the pile of stuffed animals. Eli didn't see any of it. He was staring at the wall like it was a door. Eli, I said sharply, reaching him in 2 steps. I grabbed his shoulders. His skin was slick with sweat. Eli, you're safe. You're home. His eyes snapped to me, and for a split second I saw pure terror. Then anger. You won't open it! He screamed at me, spitting the words. You won't open it! You left me! I'm here, I said, voice shaking now. I'm right here. My wife tried to climb onto the bed to hold him, but he shoved at her with surprising strength. Don't touch me! He shrieked, and then, You're not my mother! My wife recoiled like she'd been struck. I pulled Eli against my chest. His heart was hammering. He was shaking so hard his teeth clicked. What do you see? I asked, because some part of my brain, the investigative part, the part that always wants a narrative to make sense, needed to know. Eli's fingers dug into my shirt. The fire, he whispered. His voice dropped from scream to thin, strangled breath. It's everywhere. There's no fire, I said. Look. Look around. His gaze fluttered confused, like the world was sliding in and out of focus. Smoke, he whispered, and coughed once, harsh and wet. I can't breathe. My wife ran to the bathroom and came back with a cold washcloth, pressing it to his forehead. Eli flinched but didn't fight her this time. He went limp in my arms as if the terror had drained him. His breathing slowed, but his eyes stayed open, glassy and haunted. I held him until his eyelids finally drooped. Right before he fell asleep, he murmured something so quiet I almost missed it. Don't let the plane go down, he said. My spine went rigid. What? I whispered. His mouth moved again, barely forming the words. Don't let it hit the water. Then he slipped into sleep like a switch had been flipped. The room stayed lit. My wife and I sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, watching his chest rise and fall, listening for any change in his breathing. Finally, my wife whispered, What is happening? I didn't answer. Because if I said what I was thinking out loud, it would become real. Instead, I told myself, kids absorb things. Maybe he saw a documentary. Maybe someone at school talked about a crash. Maybe he overheard a news story. Except, we didn't watch those things. And at 5, he didn't have a phone, didn't have a tablet, didn't have unsupervised access to anything that could feed him that imagery. And the name. Daniel. The way he said it, like he was reminding us. The next morning, I found him at the kitchen table, already drawing. Same angle. Same falling line. Same thick black smoke. I poured coffee and tried to talk like normal people do in normal kitchens. Hey buddy, I said, forcing brightness. How'd you sleep? He didn't respond. My wife set down a bowl of cereal. Eli, honey, eat something. He stared at the cereal like he didn't recognize it. I ate different cereal, he said. Different how? He frowned, like the question annoyed him again. It came in a box with a boat. My wife and I exchanged a glance. Our cereal boxes didn't have boats. They had cartoon bees and leprechauns and bright, childish mascots. I sat across from him. Daniel, I said carefully, testing it. His head lifted instantly. His eyes met mine with a flash of approval. Yes, he said. My wife's hand tightened around the edge of the table. I kept my voice steady. Okay, Daniel. Tell me, where do you think you're from? He didn't hesitate. I lived near the water. Like a lake? I asked. No. His crayon moved in circles, pressing hard. The big water. The ocean. We live nowhere near the ocean. My throat felt dry. And what happened to you? He stopped drawing. The kitchen went very still. Even the refrigerator hum sounded louder. Eli, Daniel, looked at me with an expression I can't fully explain. Not sadness exactly. Not fear. More like resignation. I died, he said. My wife made a small sound, half gasp, half choke. I forced myself to keep going. How? He pointed at the drawing with the blunt tip of the black crayon. The plane, he said. It went down. It hit the water. It was dark and cold, and then it burned. He swallowed, and the movement of his throat looked too adult for his face. I couldn't get my belt off, he whispered. I felt something in me recoil, instinctively. A part of me that wanted to shove the entire conversation back into the realm of make-believe. But another part, the part that has spent years chasing facts, double-checking sources, hunting down details that people swear can't exist, leaned forward. What plane? I asked carefully, as if I were interviewing a witness. Eli blinked slowly. The one I was on. With who? I asked. He frowned. Buster wasn't there. Buster was at home. Buster? My wife echoed, voice barely audible. My dog, Eli said like we were slow. His name was Buster. My hands tightened around my coffee mug. What kind of dog? Brown, he said. Then, more specific. With one white paw. The hairs on my arms lifted. Kids say vague things. They say brown dog. They say plane crash. They say ocean. But the white paw detail, so unnecessary, so precise, lodged in my mind like a splinter. I tried to end it there. I really did. I tried to steer the morning back into routine. Shoes. Backpack. Lunchbox. The small normalities that keep parents from drowning in panic. But at the door, as my wife adjusted Eli's jacket, he looked past her shoulder, eyes unfocused for a second. Then he said quietly, Don't call me Eli at school. My wife's face tightened. Your teacher knows you as Eli. He pulled away from her hands. That's not my name. I stepped closer. What happens at school when they call you Eli? He looked up at me. And he said, with a calm that chilled me more than the screaming had, I remember the water. Then he walked out to the car like he hadn't just cracked something open in our lives. That day, while he was gone, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and a knot in my stomach. I told myself I was going to prove it was nothing. I told myself I was going to find where he'd heard it. A movie. A book. An article. Because the alternative, that my 5-year-old was remembering dying in a plane crash, wasn't just absurd. It was impossible. And yet, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear him screaming, Open it! Like he'd been trapped somewhere I couldn't reach. And for the first time since I'd become a parent, I felt afraid of a question I couldn't answer. What if he wasn't making it up? What if he was trying to tell us the truth? I didn't start researching because I believed him. I started researching because disbelief wasn't quiet enough. There's a certain kind of silence that settles into a house after something goes wrong, not loudly, not dramatically, but like dust. It coats conversations. It lingers in the pauses between words. That week, our home was full of it. Eli, Daniel, stopped correcting us every time we said his name. Instead, he simply didn't respond. At dinner, if my wife said, "Eli, pass the salt," he stared at his plate like he hadn't heard. When I repeated it using Daniel, his head lifted immediately. At school, his teacher emailed us on the third day. "He seems distracted," she wrote. "He told another student that he used to live near the ocean and that he died before he came here. Is everything okay at home?" I read the message twice, then a third time. Kids lie to other kids. That wasn't the problem. The problem was consistency. Every detail he mentioned at home appeared again at school, unchanged. The ocean. The plane. Dying. No embellishment. No escalation. Just repetition, steady, unwavering. That night, after Eli fell asleep without incident, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. My wife sat across from me, wrapped in a blanket she didn't seem to notice she was holding. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Looking," I said. "For what?" I hesitated. Then I said the quiet part out loud. "For proof he's wrong." She didn't argue. She just nodded. I started broadly, the way any rational person would. Plane crash. Ocean. Fire. There are thousands. I added filters. Time ranges. Locations near coastlines. Still too many. I closed the laptop, frustrated, and rubbed my eyes. The next morning, as I packed Eli's lunch, he sat at the counter swinging his legs. "Daniel," I said casually, "do you remember how old you were, before?" He paused. His legs stopped swinging. "I was big," he said. "How big?" "Grown up big." He thought for a second. "Bigger than you." That earned a thin smile from me, despite myself. "Really?" "Yes." He nodded. "I had a job." My hand froze mid-sandwich. "What kind of job?" He shrugged. "I flew." The word landed heavier than it should have. "You flew planes?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. I rode on them. A lot." "Why?" "Because of work." That night I tried again. "Daniel," I said as I tucked him in, "do you remember where you lived?" "Yes." "Can you tell me?" He frowned, frustrated. "You already know." "I don't," I said gently. "I want to know what you remember." He sighed, the exaggerated sigh of someone who felt burdened by stupidity. "It was called Bay something." "Bay something," I repeated. "Like Bay City? Bay Shore?" "No." He squeezed his eyes shut. "Bay Port." Bayport. My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. Bayport is not a common word. Not a city kids learn about. Not something mentioned in our lives, our books, our conversations. I kept my voice steady. "Which Bayport?" He opened his eyes. "The one by the ocean." "There are several Bayports. Some inland. Some coastal." "Do you remember the state?" I asked. He shook his head. "But I know how to get to my house." I didn't push further that night. Instead, after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop again. Bayport. Plane crash. Ocean. I expected noise. I got something else. An article. Old. Archived. Barely formatted. Small aircraft lost off coast near Bayport. Investigation ongoing. My pulse picked up. I clicked. The crash happened years ago. A private commuter plane. Nighttime. Bad weather. The aircraft went down shortly after takeoff. Wreckage recovered days later. Cause of death, impact and fire. I scrolled, heart pounding, waiting for the detail that would break the illusion. Then I saw the date. The crash occurred 4 years before Eli was born. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and told myself coincidence was still on the table. I scrolled further. There were names. Passengers listed in small, unassuming text. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Until one name snagged my attention. Daniel R. Harper. I stared at it longer than I should have. Daniel. I almost laughed. Of course there would be a Daniel. That's not rare. That's meaningless. I clicked anyway. A local obituary loaded. A photo appeared at the top of the page. A man in his 30s. Dark hair. Neutral smile. Standing near what looked like a marina. I skimmed. Beloved son. Devoted dog owner. Survived by parents and sister. My breath caught. Dog owner. I scrolled down. Daniel was rarely seen without his dog, Buster. I felt my stomach drop, hard and fast, like missing a step in the dark. I read the sentence again. Slower. Buster. The same name. The same context. I pushed my chair back and stood, pacing the kitchen. Coincidences stack until they don't look like coincidences anymore. They start to look like patterns. I scrolled further, my fingers numb. A comment section followed. Condolences. Memories. One comment mentioned Daniel's blue car, joking about how he refused to replace it despite the torn driver's seat. I sat down so suddenly the chair legs screeched against the floor. Blue car. Tear on the seat. I closed the laptop. Hard. I told myself to stop. I told myself this was exactly how confirmation bias works. You find what you're looking for. You connect dots that don't belong together. The next day, I tested him. Carefully. Methodically. Like a journalist, not a father. Daniel, I said while we built blocks on the living room floor. Do you remember your house? Yes. What color was it? White, he said immediately. With green things on the windows. Shutters? I asked. Yes. I swallowed. Did you have stairs? Yes. The stairs were loud. Loud how? They squeaked, he said, mimicking the sound with his mouth. Like this. I closed my eyes for half a second. That night, I went back to the obituary and clicked a link to a memorial page. There were photos. One showed a white house. Green shutters. Another showed a wooden staircase inside, captioned jokingly. Still haven't fixed those squeaky steps. My wife found me staring at the screen. She didn't ask what I'd found. She already knew something was wrong. I turned the laptop toward her. She read silently. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's not possible, she whispered. I know. He couldn't know this, she said. We don't know anyone there. We've never. I know, I repeated. That night, Eli had another episode. Not screaming this time. Crying. Soft, broken sobs that came from deep in his chest. When I sat beside him, he clutched my wrist. I don't want to go on the plane, he whispered. There is no plane, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Yes, there is, he insisted. His eyes were wet but focused. Present. They told me it would be okay. Who told you? The man with the clipboard. A detail I hadn't heard before. Was he nice? I asked. Eli shook his head. He didn't look at me. I felt sick. The next morning, I asked one last question, the one I didn't want to ask. Daniel, I said, do you remember how you died? He went very still. I don't like that part, he said. I know, I replied softly. But I need to understand. He hesitated, then nodded once. The plane hit the water, he said. It broke. Everything went dark. Then it was very hot. His small hands curled into fists. I was stuck, he whispered. The belt wouldn't come off. I felt my chest tighten painfully. And then? He looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed far too old. Then I wasn't there anymore, he said. And then I was with you. I didn't sleep that night. Because by then, the question wasn't if something was happening. It was what. And whether the next step, following those memories back to where they came from, was something we were brave enough to do. We didn't tell him where we were going. That was a deliberate decision. By the time we agreed to make the trip, my wife and I were operating under a new rule set, one shaped by quiet fear and a growing respect for the possibility that Eli wasn't guessing. He wasn't improvising. He was remembering. So we didn't say Bayport out loud. We didn't mention the ocean. We didn't mention planes, fires, or Daniel Harper. We just packed a bag, took 2 days off work, and told Eli we were going on a drive. He accepted this without question. That alone should have unsettled me. The drive took just under 4 hours. The landscape shifted slowly, suburbs thinning into long stretches of road, trees giving way to marshland. Eli sat in the back seat, quiet. No tablet. No toys. Just staring out the window. About 30 minutes from the coast, he spoke. You missed the turn. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? The turn, he repeated, pointing lazily out the window. Back there. I forced a calm tone. I'm following the GPS. He frowned. That's not how I used to go. My wife shot me a look. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, the air changed. That briny, unmistakable smell of salt crept into the car through the vents. Eli inhaled deeply. There, he said softly. That's it. My pulse spiked. That's what? The water. When Bayport finally appeared on the welcome sign, my stomach dropped. Eli leaned forward in his seat, suddenly alert. We're here, he said. I pulled over. I hadn't planned to stop there, but my hands were shaking too badly to keep driving. We are? I asked, turning to look at him. He nodded, certain. Yes. This is where I lived. I hadn't said the town's name. Not once. The town itself was unremarkable. Quiet streets. Low buildings. A marina just visible beyond a row of shops. But Eli reacted to it like someone returning to a place they'd dreamed about for years. As we drove slowly through downtown, he began pointing things out. That used to be a diner, he said, indicating a modern pharmacy. I checked my mirrors, my breath shallow. Used to be? Yes. They had good pancakes. Further down. That wasn't there before. Then, the movie theater burned down. They built something else. I didn't correct him. Because when I later looked it up, the old Bayport Theater had burned down 12 years earlier. We parked near the marina. The moment Eli stepped out of the car, he stopped. His face changed. Not excitement. Not fear. Recognition. I don't like it here, he said quietly. My wife crouched beside him. Why not? He stared at the water, flat and gray under the overcast sky. Because this is where it ended, he said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. We walked anyway. Eli lagged behind us, moving slowly, like each step required effort. When we reached the docks, he froze. That's wrong, he said. What is? I asked. The boats, he said. They're too new. He walked closer to the edge, peering into the water. My plane went down over there, he said, pointing, not randomly, but with precision. Not close. Farther out. How do you know? I asked. He looked at me, confused by the question. Because it took a long time to sink. My wife pressed her hand into my arm. We didn't stay long at the marina. Instead, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Daniel, I said, testing the name again. Do you want to show us your house? He hesitated. Then nodded. We drove through residential streets older than the ones near our home. Mature trees. Narrow sidewalks. Houses with history etched into their frames. Slow down, Eli said. I did. Left, he said. I turned. Then, stop. I pulled over. The house stood in front of us like it had been waiting. White siding. Green shutters. 2 stories. My throat closed. Eli stared at it through the windshield. That's it, he said. My wife covered her mouth with both hands. I parked the car and sat there longer than necessary. You don't have to go inside, I said, though I knew how weak that sounded. Eli was already opening his door. The house looked lived in, but not busy. A car in the driveway. Wind chimes hanging from the porch, stirring faintly. Eli climbed the steps and stopped at the front door. He didn't knock. Instead, he pointed. The spare key used to be there, he said, indicating a loose board near the railing. But they moved it. I felt dizzy. I knocked. An elderly woman answered. White hair pulled back. Sharp, searching eyes. Yes? She asked. I swallowed. I'm sorry to bother you. This is going to sound strange. Her gaze dropped to Eli. Her face strained of color. Oh, she whispered. Eli looked up at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eli said softly, You fixed the steps. The woman's hand flew to her chest. No one knows that, she said. They squeaked for years. She looked at me, eyes wet. Who is he? I didn't know how to answer. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. Eli moved through it like a guide. That wall used to have pictures, he said. My room was upstairs. Second door. The bathroom light flickered. Each statement landed like a quiet detonation. The woman, Margaret, Daniel's mother, sat heavily on the couch. I buried my son, she said, voice shaking. I buried him. Eli stood in front of her. I know, he said. She began to cry. I wanted to stop it. To rewind everything. But it was too late. Because Eli hadn't even reached the part that would erase all remaining doubt. That came when he turned to me and said, The box is still here. What box? I asked. The one with the watch, he said. You hid it. Margaret looked up sharply. No, she whispered. No one knew about that. Eli pointed toward the hall closet. Top shelf, he said. Behind the coats. Silence filled the house. Margaret stood, trembling, and walked to the closet. She reached up, pulled down a small metal box, opened it. Inside lay an old pilot's watch. Margaret collapsed into the chair, sobbing. That was Daniel's, she said. He hid it before his last trip. He said he didn't want to lose it again. Eli watched her calmly. I didn't, he said. I came back. And in that moment, standing in a house that did not belong to him, but once had, I understood something terrifying and irreversible. We had not come here to investigate a story. We had come here to confirm it. No one spoke for a long time. The house seemed to absorb the silence, the old walls holding it the way they must have held laughter once. The ticking of a clock somewhere upstairs sounded unnaturally loud, each second a reminder that time, whatever it meant in this moment, was still moving. Margaret's hands shook as she closed the metal box. I put that away after the funeral, she said, her voice thin and frayed. I didn't want to see it anymore. I didn't want to remember. Eli stood in front of her, small and steady, his expression unreadable. I didn't like wearing it, he said. It was heavy. I felt my knees weaken. That detail hadn't been written anywhere. It wasn't in the obituary. It wasn't in the comments. It wasn't even in the memorial posts. It was a preference. Margaret looked at him the way someone looks at a photograph they've loved for years, carefully, reverently, afraid it might vanish if they blinked. How old are you? She asked. 5, Eli said. She laughed softly through her tears. You died at 37. I know, he replied. The words were not dramatic. They weren't triumphant. They were matter-of-fact. Margaret turned to me, her eyes searching my face for denial, for skepticism, for rescue. You didn't tell him these things, she said. No, I answered honestly. I didn't know most of them myself. She swallowed. Then how does he know about the watch? About the stairs? About the Marina Road that floods when it rains? Eli interrupted her. The flooding's worse now, he said. They didn't fix the drain. Margaret closed her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, not to us, but to someone who wasn't there. I should have gone with you. I told you I would. Eli's shoulders tensed. I didn't want you to come, he said. I was scared. She looked up sharply. You were always scared of flying. My wife let out a quiet sob beside me. Margaret reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Eli's arm. Can I ask you something? She said. He nodded. Do you remember the last phone call? Eli frowned, concentrating. Yes, he said slowly. You were crying. I told you I'd be back in 2 days. Her breath hitched. You promised. I know. She covered her face. That was the moment something shifted. Up until then, I'd been clinging, desperately, to the idea that there might still be an explanation. An elaborate coincidence. An unconscious cue. Some crack in our logic. But this wasn't information. This was interaction. Memory responding to memory. Margaret wiped her eyes and looked at Eli again. There's something, she said, voice trembling. Something no one else knows. Not even my husband. My heart began to race. She stood slowly and walked to the bookshelf near the window. From behind a row of hardcovers, she pulled out a thin envelope, yellowed with age. I kept this, she said. I never opened it. She held it out. Eli stared at it, then shook his head. That's the letter I didn't send, he said. My breath caught. What letter? I asked. Margaret looked at me, stunned. Daniel wrote it the night before his flight. He said he was going to throw it away. I found it in his desk after he died. Eli shifted uncomfortably. I didn't want you to read it, he said. I was angry. Angry about what? Margaret asked. That you tried to stop me, he replied. That you said I should take the job closer to home. Her lips trembled. You were chasing money. Eli nodded. I know. I shouldn't have. The room felt impossibly small. Can you tell me, Margaret asked softly, what the letter says? Eli looked at the floor. I said I was sorry, he whispered. I said if something happened, it wasn't your fault. Margaret opened the envelope with shaking hands. She unfolded the paper. Read. And collapsed into tears. It says exactly that, she sobbed. Exactly? My wife pressed her hand to her mouth, her entire body shaking. There was nothing left to test. Nothing left to prove. Every rational defense I had built over decades, education, skepticism, evidence-based thinking, crumbled under the weight of something I could not explain away. After a while, Eli grew tired. The emotional intensity seemed to drain him in a way it hadn't before. He curled up on the couch, head resting against my wife's side, eyes fluttering. I don't feel like Daniel all the time, he murmured. What do you mean? I asked. Sometimes I'm just Eli, he said. Sometimes I remember. Sometimes I don't. Margaret watched him with a mix of awe and grief. Does it hurt? She asked. He thought for a moment. Not like before. Before when? When I was stuck, he said quietly. In the dark. My chest tightened. We left as the sun began to set. Margaret hugged Eli carefully, as if afraid he might break, or disappear. Thank you for coming back, she whispered. Eli nodded sleepily. I had to. In the car, none of us spoke. The ocean was barely visible in the distance, a dark, endless line. As we pulled onto the highway, Eli stirred. Dad? He asked. Yes? I don't think I need to remember anymore, he said. I glanced at him in the mirror. What do you mean? I told her, he replied. That was the important part. And the rest? I asked. He yawned. The rest can go. He fell asleep minutes later. In the weeks that followed, the drawing stopped. The nightmares faded. He answered to Eli without hesitation. But sometimes, rarely, I'd catch him staring at the sky when a plane passed overhead. Not afraid. Just thoughtful. I never published the story. Some truths aren't meant for headlines or debates. They exist whether we believe in them or not. And I live now with one certainty I never expected to carry: we are more than one life. And sometimes the past doesn't haunt us. Sometimes it comes back, just long enough to say goodbye.